So I just want to welcome everyone to this session, which is home education around the world. And we are going to have some representatives from different countries sharing with us something about the legal position of home education in their countries, how they're dealing with it, and perhaps share some tips with us as well, so we can learn from each other. And I think as times are changing, it's going to become more and more necessary for us to all be talking to one another and standing up for one another, and supporting the right of parents to have the freedom to educate their children. So I am going to we are starting off today with Australia, because Australia, it is now 11 p.m. for them. I'm just looking to find, sorry, I've got to find, when you spotlight one and the other one disappears. Where have you gone, Heidi? There you are. Okay. Now, we had a little bit of drama today because we were going to have Karen Chegwin join us, and she has had a family emergency, so she can't join us. So Patricia has kindly stepped in and agreed literally like within the last hour. So bear with us. She hasn't had a lot of time to prepare, so Heidi is going to assist her, and they will be sharing with us about home education in Australia. And I'm going to get myself out of this. Okay, welcome.
Thank you so much. Hello, Aussie, Aussie, Aussie. Oi, oi, oi. Come on, Patricia.
Who's the extrovert? Who's the extrovert?
And that's the reason why when Juliet asked, who can jump in, I thought of Patricia. She's amazing, very good with detail, terrific homeschooler, loving mum, and helps so many people in the community, so many families out in the community. So she's going to let us know about the legal framework, or the way it's all set up here in Australia for number one, for home education.
Yep. So most of Australia has compulsory schooling years. So in those compulsory schooling years, you're required to be registered or enrolled somewhere, whether it's in a school, a distance education, or registered with your state. But the age that you begin and end varies with each state. So in our state, where Heidi and I are, we have to start by 6.5 years old and up to 17 years old. So with that, if we wanted to register with the state, our requirements are to fill out application forms and to prove our planning processes and what we are going to do over a 12-month period with our children to the state.
So how regularly do they contact you?
In Queensland, we do it once a year. I believe in New South Wales, they can get up to 3 years. And Victoria, I think, is either 1 or 2 years. So depending on the state that you're in, each state has its own rules.
Okay, Heidi, were you wanting to add something there?
Yes, so we can put in an application, and then I'm not sure if you said that we got the 6 weeks, is it, to get the plan together?
Oh, not if you register in Queensland. If you're going to do your application, you have to put in the plan at the same time. Okay. Whereas if you're needing to, if you need to escape school quickly, we have a different section of the law where we can apply for provisional registration, and that provisional registration gives us 60 days cover without having to do the plan.
So we're still legal home educating.
Yes.
However, it's not, we don't have the approval as yet. We've got 60 days provisional.
Yeah, so
we don't have the plan in yet.
Yeah, that's completely separate to the application process. So that one is just a provisional one where you apply for provisional just so that you can get that interim cover. So whether it's because you've moved into state and you're still getting your boundaries and everything, where it could be a variety of reasons where you just need that little bit of time to sort of work out where you need to be and what you're going to do. What's your next step?
So how, what does this all look like in practice? And are there ways to work around the law? That was one tip, that if you have to move, that you can work with the law. You did something recently that has only been done rarely. You mentioned that you combine a family plan. So that's a way that we can work around things. Yeah, you've been approved. So
yes, yeah, so no, I haven't been approved yet. So I'm testing it out at this stage. So I've put, normally we have to do one plan per child and it has to be completely individualized. However, the last few years of my plans, I've had a lot of unit studies in them that we're doing as a collaborative exercise. So I figured, well, since I'm already doing those jointly, I'm going to see if they will accept it all as one, both children in the one single plan for the 12 months. But I've got to wait and see. That's not approved yet, but yeah. We'll see how we go.
Has been done rarely, a couple of times, you know, of it being done. But
I think I'd heard of it once before, but I don't know who or when.
Okay. Well, it makes a lot of sense, you know, when your children are just a couple of years apart, that you might do the same science experiment, but go deeper with one person, one than the other.
May I ask something quickly? Do people experience difficulties within the system? You know, is there sometimes where that permission or approval that's asked for that is withheld for reasons that might not seem reasonable?
Yeah, there are a lot of times where the schools and the principals and things like that may step in and try and convince parents that they're not legally allowed to keep their children away from school. So we have to sort of support each other in ensuring that we all know that that's not the legal requirement. Our legal requirement is that our children are required to have an education in those compulsory years, but how that education looks is up to us. Whether we do school in mainstream, whether we do a distance ed school, where we learn from home and like activities with those schools, or whether we do it as a home education registration on our own and within our community.
Yeah. So you mentioned however that looks like for us. What about if it's more relaxed, maybe even referred to as unschooling? And how would we show that in a plan then?
So that's just comes down to sort of how your children learn and how you're planning to deliver that education. And in our registration process, you can make that however you like. So if you want a more relaxed version, then you can put that in, and that's not an issue. I don't think any of the states have an issue with that I know of, but I know ours certainly does not. And you can, like, it's a whole variety. People do all different types of plans that they submit. So we can use the ones that were offered on the website. There's only a few left on the education website, but they used to have, I think, like 8 of them or so. So we can use them, or we can make it ourselves. We can do it. I've seen some trying to constrict it and see how less they can do, and I've seen one page plans submitted and approved.
Yeah. So then when the report is done, and the first report's done in 10 months and then 12 monthly after that, when the report's done, the family then report what they did do, and it may or may not reflect the plan. Or you aim to do it loosely, but you could put the report in as long as it shows improvement in areas. That's the other thing.
Not so much improvement. You just have to show progress. So progress doesn't always mean improvement.
Okay.
And when we submit that report, it gives us the options to show whether we've changed things up from the plan that we originally just thought that we would do, or whether we did follow it, and it just asks us to explain why.
I want to also ask, are there any murmurings of laws changing or being made stricter? Is your government concerned about home education in any way and wanting to clamp down?
I haven't seen the laws changing. I have seen the department's interpretations of the laws changing a lot each year. And you will see that reflected on the education website itself, on what it expects of you, as well as all the information that gets sent out to registered home educators on what our requirements are. But as long as we are aware of what the actual laws are, then we can kind of push those boundaries against what they are wanting us to do if it doesn't meet with what the law states.
You gave a good example about the equivalent to a music or arts teacher at school, what we're starting to be able to do where it never used to be that way. That was a great example, Patricia.
Yeah, there was a couple of years where our state was trying to refrain from us being able to use any outside courses and outside opportunities that weren't specifically taught by us as the parent. So they were trying to deem that the education had to be delivered by the parent and only the parent. Whereas there was a lot of discussion around, well, schools get to use specialist teachers for music and for sport. They don't use just that one teacher to teach everything that's offered. And they do excursions and they do lots of other multitudes of activities. But more recently, we've been able to put that in. And I'm pretty sure that I've seen people mentioning that it's actually documented that we can use that now.
Yes, you can even use business courses or entrepreneurial courses or woodwork courses and things like that taught by others. You can put that in now. Yes. Very good.
We have a question about what is the implication if an application is declined?
Applications aren't usually declined unless it is due to court orders. So because we have the parental right to choose our children's education and like the style of their education, it's only becomes an issue if there are court orders in place not allowing that to happen, whether it's from separated parents or whether it's to do with child safety. So otherwise, if there's any issues and it doesn't quite meet the standard of what they expect, they contact the family and the parent and just get that more information to get it up to standard of what they expect.
You've been contacted then too, Patricia, and some of our other friends to help them get it up to that speed. Yeah, like to get it up.
Not by the department, no, not by
no, but by the other family. So if a family had been told that it needs more substance, if you like, you're one to actually ask questions to assist in add more substance to the report. Yes, yes, very good.
Are there any ways that the home educators have had to sort of work with the government or to negotiate the position of home education in the country? And is there anything we can learn from Australia in that respect?
We do have some members that have had meetings with people from the department to discuss sort of the difference between the legal requirements and, as I said, what they were expecting us to do in recent years, where they were starting to expect more of us than what was actually required. So that's gotten a lot more relaxed in the last probably 12 months or so now, where we are going back to more what we're required to do and not what they were wanting us to do.
What about, is there any negotiation done or with policy changes that there might be the more, our word maybe the hybrid education, that there's consultation, like there's some state schools, for example, starting a homeschool day. So there's still government funding by the schools that they invite homeschoolers in on that day. That's quite new, yeah?
Yeah, I think that's more around being able to access their facilities and stuff like that, rather than it being more of a recognised educational option with the state.
Okay. So it's an initiative by the school, even though it's a state school.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, ladies. That's our 15 minutes for Australia. So thank you so much. And I'm going to
Aussie.
Oi, oi, oi. Thank you, ladies. And if anyone's joining us, we are talking home education around the world. Welcome to those who have joined us to kind of come and watch and see what we're talking about. I am now welcoming Tim from Taiwan. And Tim, what can you tell us about home education in Taiwan?
Well, good evening and good morning, good afternoon, and thanks very much for inviting me. And my name is Tim Chen. I'm home educator and also advocate living in Taiwan. And Taiwan is a very small country, but with a population as big as Australia. And our land area is only 1/200th of Australia. So, so imagine packing Australian into an area only about 1/200th of the Australia, and that's what we are. And but it's a very exciting place to homeschool, and I'm going to share with you and why I say that, and a little bit about myself. And here are my families. And as you can see, I'm international, very international family. And my wife is Polish, and my daughter is now in the United States. She studied a musical drama school in US in Los Angeles. And my son is in Taiwan now, but this picture was taken when my wife and my daughter, my younger daughter, were living in Japan because we spent our winters in Japan running a ski school there. And I've been advocating for home education, education choice since 2007, and being homeschooled since 2003. And interesting enough, I also serve in the Taiwan's National Education Curriculum Review Committee, which is the committee that decide on what people are going to learn in the next 10 years. You may be wondering why Taiwan government has appointed somebody um, who is home educated and advocating home education and put it on the National Curriculum Review Committee. And I will explain a little bit later on that. And also I advise on the experimental policies, experimental education policy in Taiwan. And I wrote books in Chinese and about our experience in home education. I have a privilege to serve with our colleague on the panel, Debra Bell, and as a Global Home Education Conference board member. So unique thing about Taiwan home education is that we came to this picture, to this global home education movement a bit later than everyone else, which is actually our advantage, because by becoming late, we managed to learn from the mistakes or the experience of others. So we kind of like standing on the shoulders of the giants, and especially like Australia and UK and the United States. So our homeschool legislation is actually parent initiated. I started lobbying the government in 2007 for better regulation for home education. But prior to that, there was just one line in the National Education Act, which says that parents may choose any lawful means to educate their children and in a non-school mode of education. So it sounds like the UK education otherwise, like the parents may choose to educate their kids in school or otherwise. So that was the intent. And but however, in practice, when it was implemented, the local education authority decided that, well, we are not going to pass a law to regulate this. And when we asked them why not, they said because nobody has ever asked for it. Nobody came and applied for it. I said, well, so we have application here. Would you like to accept it? They said no, because we don't have a law yet. So you have on the statute that you said that parents may choose to educate their children outside the school, but there are no implementation law which enforce that law. So we started to initiate and start negotiating with the government, and then we draft the law which is based on what we need and what we want. So, and also our graduate, our alumni, home educated students are very active in advocating their rights as well. So most recently in 2019, the state passed a law which is largely drafted by the student themselves to protect the rights of home educated students, which I'll go into a little more detail later. And so one thing, the law guarantees that the homeschool parents or the group that represent homeschool parents like myself will have at least 2/5 of the seats on what we call non-school-based educational review board, experimental education review board committee. And I kind of borrowed that idea from the Australian, well, one of the Australian models, and Australians are governed by different, provinces. And so I believe one of them, I can't remember which one it is, and actually have like a 50-50 seat split. So the parents are also on the board to make sure that the education authority don't just unilaterally decide what's best interest for the parents and the kids. And but we managed to get 2/5, which means that we are one vote shy from over half. So we just need to convince one other person sitting on the board in order to vote for our favorite. And also homeschool students, and they can access all the school activity, and including sports club, etc., etc. So it creates a very interesting hybrid school mode whereby children take advantage of what their district school can offer, and also have them educated at home at the same time. So there are quite a few cases like that. And we also took a page from New Zealand and British Columbia in Canada about tuition subsidies. So, so for our high schoolers, which is basically anyone between age 15 to 18, and then if they apply for homeschool, they would get 2,000 euro or like 2,200 US dollar and a year as a tuition subsidy, and those are cash, which goes straight into the student's bank account, not parents, and you can spend whatever you want. I think in Canada they are only allowed to spend it on hockey stick and stuff like that, but we're quite free to do it in anyway. I'm sure our Canadian colleague is going to correct me on that, and also. We do get counseling and support services for assessment. So if your child is a special ed or a student with a special ed and stuff, and then you can still access the school special ed resources. So it's not going to be like, oh, you're homeschooled, so we just hung you dry out there. No, we cannot, because they're still part of the national education system, and the state has the responsibility to look after, to take care of every child. And also, finally, last but not the least, is the college admission, because it's a very important thing that homeschooler they underwent like a complete separate education curriculum from the national curriculum, and when you go to a college admission, and the university have to have a special place admission process whereby they do not use standardized test as the admission like a gatekeeper, so that the student can apply based on their own merit. It can be a portfolio application or anything else, and it doesn't have to have the standardized test result. So, and very, very briefly, so here are the numbers. Numbers are very small at the moment. We only account for about 0.34% of the school-age kids at the moment, but it has grown quite a lot. It has pretty much quadrupled in the past 10 years. So, and also right now, Taiwan is kind of late to this global pandemic. We have not had any case. We had 0 case for the past 300 days, and then suddenly we got 1,000 new cases this week. So the school went into the shutdown mode, which all of you are quite familiar with. And so suddenly right now we have 100% homeschooler, and then everybody is experiencing how that works. And parents now have a very good appreciation, understanding of the homeschool parents, which we all have to put up with our kids, in the past 20 years. So, and just a very quick overview how it looked like. And so when my daughter was born, and that's how the education looked like in Taiwan. Pretty standard. You have a vocational school, you have a standard high school, you have public and private school, and that's about it. There's nothing. But fast forward 20 years later, yeah, I'm fast forwarding now, and then you have like the rainbow color of education choices. So within the public school, you also have a charter school, you have private school, vocational school as well. But also on the right-hand side, where you have a high degree of education freedom, you have what I earlier called the non-school-based experimental education. So you have the individual one, which are commonly understood as homeschoolers, and you have a group, which a lot of people nowadays use it like a co-op or a pod school, which has become popular after pandemic. And also there are institutions where it will be more better described as like a pseudo school, which is a micro school, a school that is has a very light regulation touch. And all of them are recognized equally by the state. So, and also we have a school-based experimental education, which can go all the way to university. And that's what I'm doing now. I'm setting up a experimental university in Taiwan, which will be one of the kind, because we basically use a homeschool or self-determined learning philosophy to allow students to design their own curriculum, and then basically receive a degree is accredited by the states at the end of their study. So to sum up, and Taiwan is unique in the way that we work with the states, and the student work with the parents, and also school is part of the actor. So it's a four-way relationship. It's a multi-stakeholder relationship, partnership, whereby everybody contribute and everybody try to work together with each other, and we are exerting our rights, at the same time try to get as many people to be on our side as possible at the same time. So thank you very much. I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Well, we won't have time for questions, but Tim, you are on the app, and of course you can go and find him on the conference app and chat with him. Tim, thank you. You've done some amazing work there for the home educators in your country. And I think there are some chat in the chat. Go and read the chat. There are some comments there for you that you can follow up on. So now, we are going to go to Russia. So I'm looking for Alexei, and I'm going to, okay, he needs to put his video on so that I can spotlight him.
Hello, do you hear me?
There you are. There you are. Let me spotlight you. Hang on a sec.
Hello. Do you hear me well?
I can hear you perfectly. Thank you for joining us, Alexei. All the way from Moscow, am I right?
Yes, from Moscow. That's right.
Yes. So we definitely want to hear everything you've got to say about home education in Russia, or all the countries that you work with, really.
Yes. So home education in Russia is legal since 1992, when it was reintroduced legally after 70 years of complete ban under Soviet regime. So communist government didn't like freedom of education. Everybody was supposed to be brainwashed in one and only way. And before revolution, before 1917, it existed in Russia. And many of the noble people and aristocracy and actually other social groups of society have been educating their children at home, at least in the young ages. And actually is probably the oldest and most traditional way of educating children, home education. And we are happy that it is legal again for almost 30 years now in Russia. And we estimate around 100,000 children are being homeschooled in Russia currently. And this number is growing. Because of COVID restrictions, many schools have been closed last year, and many school children were forced to be educated through online technologies. And there was a resistance to it. There was a lot of negative comments from parents and children on the negative effects of sitting unlimited hours in front of your digital screen, and your eyes and your brain and your body do not take it easy. And so right now, most of COVID restrictions are lifted in Russia, and we're pretty much back to normal life as long as you wear a mask somewhere in your pocket or on your face. So it's pretty flexible, although there are fears of the third wave of COVID, as they put it, but so far it's more or less normal here. So we have seen some increase of homeschooling, but not as dramatic as in the US. I was told lately that a number of homeschoolers have almost doubled in the United States in the last year, and now they represent roughly 10% of all homeschool age kids. And before that it was 5%, and so yeah, I think it's the the largest number of homeschool children are in the US, but in Russia we probably have one of the largest numbers in all Europe. I think 100,000. There are different estimates, but it's around this number. Also, I was told that in Brazil there was a recent boom in number of homeschoolers, and they're telling me they even overpassed Russia, which is good to hear. But there are some attempts to over-regulate homeschooling in Brazil because legislators got scared of this explosive growth. And the same fears are present in Russia and in former Soviet Union republics as well. And almost every year we have one or the other attempt by the government or Ministry of Education to introduce a new type of regulation requiring obligatory compulsory tests, sometimes not only annually, but maybe every 6 months. And they want to force everyone to follow one and only state-approved curricula on all the subjects. So those attempts are there, but we are trying to convince legislators and society at large not to follow this track. And we have formed a national association of homeschooling in Russia a year and a half ago, and we are collecting petitions, online petitions, and the last initiative has collected over 33,000 signatures, and they were presented to the Russian Parliament, Senate, and administration of President of Russia. And we're rather active also in the mass media, in social media, and we managed so far to really stop those initiatives. But there are still many gray areas. It's not always clear what the responsibility and the rights of the parents are. And so local authorities, we have roughly 80 regions in Russia, like 50 states in America, who have their own local legislative powers and local ministries of education who sometimes interfere into the autonomy of the family, which is a bad thing. And also we help them legally and in social media, in mass media, to really explain to the local authorities that it's not allowed and they should not interfere into the affairs of the family. Because according to the Russian Constitution and the Family Code of Laws, and according to the law on education, of Russia, the family is the basic and foundational unit of society that should be protected and cherished by the state. And so we reinforce those good points, this good language from the laws that we have, and we try to communicate this idea. But given the very strong and centuries-long state, very strong state in Russia, and the tradition of interference of the state into all affairs, it's really difficult sometimes to get mass support of those ideas, but we are doing our best. I will not give you all the details, although I have them, of all the initiatives, all the legal details about this. But the main point for you to maybe to remember is that homeschooling is legal in Russia. It is developing, and also in the neighboring countries. So, for example, we run, me and my wife, Irina Shamolina, we run a classical conversations program, homeschooling curriculum, that we have translated and adapted from America, where it's probably one of the largest homeschooling curricula with over 120,000, I think, students enrolled. And it is there for more than 20 years. And it's, we believe, is one of the best and most successful, effective, and efficient homeschooling programs based on the classical approach of 7 liberal arts, trivium, quadrivium, dating back to Aristotle and to the Middle Ages approach. And Dorothy Sayers actually has written a very powerful essay in Oxford, I think in 1948 or 49, The Lost Tools of Learning, it was called, where she said that there are many problems in the modern way of to educate, this mass factory style education approach, and maybe we should come back to the classical methods of education. And we very much share this idea. And we have launched this Classical Conversations Russia program several years ago. And now we have communities in 115 cities and towns and villages throughout Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, from Vladivostok on Pacific Ocean to Kaliningrad on the Baltic Sea. And it's developing very well. So we hope to launch in the next 3 years, the last 3 remaining years of high school equivalent for 16, 17, and 18-year-olds. And then we will have the full alternative to school from age 6 to 18. And now we're starting to think about the bachelor's alternatives, bachelor's possibilities and opportunities for our graduates, future graduates, as our children mature. And we're exploring various options. And one of them is to really establish our own Classical Conversations International University, with international baccalaureate program being awarded for the classical studies and liberal arts and sciences approach. So this is the quick overview. Yeah, also I can add that many parents in Russia, they educate according to their own curriculum that they choose, but to be on the safe side, many of them pass state exams at the end. And we have a special company, Homeschool Support Center, established, and it is arranged that every year a child passes online tests and receives an official paper from the state school in Russia that he has completed, let's say, grade 7 program, and the state should have no questions to ask if they are asking those questions for some reason. So many families do this to be on the safe side, but technically speaking, it's not obligatory. until 9th and 11th grade SATs exams equivalents that we have in Russia. Also, we very much like the Open University of UK open approach. I have completed my MBA program with the Open University, and they don't ask for any papers. So we don't like those excessive focus and obsession of many with preparing for these SATs, which is a different skill from acquiring a real knowledge. And so we are really exploring an opportunity to do probably also classical studies with the Open University, and I am in contact with the Open University of UK to help us explore this option as well. So this is more or less what I wanted to share. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer. And finally, I want to say that we have held a very good global home education conference in Moscow and in St. Petersburg in 2018, and it went very well. I think it was the largest conference in terms of speakers. We had over 100 speakers, I think, from 30 countries, and we had it in both capitals of Russia. Former capital St. Petersburg, built by Peter the Great in 1703, I think, and in Moscow, the old and current capital. So we hope that the next conference will be held in the Philippines at some point in the future, as it was planned, and wishing every success to your conference that we are all present at right now. And this is a very important thing that you're doing. And I want to wish all success and God's help in all the good endeavors of all the participants of this conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alex. I must say that is actually very encouraging. The news from Russia, I think, better than what I would have expected. So thank you for sharing that. There are some comments in the chat if you want to go back and have a look, but because we are on a schedule, we're going to keep things moving. But thank you so much for joining us and sharing. It really is encouraging news, and I think we can learn from each other and encourage one another. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm now calling on Hslda from Israel to talk about home education in Israel, and I'm going to get out of the picture. You need to unmute, Hslda.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm from Israel. I'm a homeschool mom for about 20 years. I have 4 kids. The youngest is 14 years old. Before I start, English is not my first language. I'm sorry for that. And I will use the term unschooling. You can't avoid American influence here. So the good news is that homeschooling in Israel is possible. It's legal. It happens. There are today about 600 homeschooling families in Israel. Most of them are unschoolers, but with time, there are less unschoolers. The legal procedure there is a legal procedure to get a homeschooling permit. Actually, it's not a permission to homeschool. You receive an exemption of the mandatory education law. We still call it a homeschooling permit. It's less negative, and we use it. There are families who do not ask the formal permit. This number decreases with time, especially now with the COVID pandemic. There are a lot of people that take out kids from school, and children in school are already registered, so you can't avoid the formalities. If I'll have time in the end, I will tell more about the problems of taking out from school. It has a bit, it's a bit different than starting from the beginning. So the formal procedure, you have to ask this permit every year. It has two parts. One of them is submitting a written request, and the other is having a home visit. So every year you sending these papers, you got a call, people come to your house, processing it, and you receive this written permit for 1 year. Exemption, but again. About the written request, there are a few sections you have to put there. The first section is should describe your educational ideology. The regulations, the homeschooling regulation states that child place is in school. Thus, only families with well-established educational ideology that do not accept school will get this permit. Personally, I support only this part of the procedure because it helps the parents to focus. Like when you must write down your ideology, what do you want, why do you want, why do you take this responsibility, you understand it yourself. The second part is the curriculum. Again, the regulation states that you have to expose your child to 55% of the curriculum. That means languages, math and science, physical education, arts, and social heritage. So this definition of expose the child to 55% leaves plenty of space for interpretation. And then you can decide what's in it, what's not in it. There are families that use the government school curriculum, and write it down as their curriculum and have the kids learn it. For unschoolers, it's a bit tricky because you should write a curriculum, but I don't want to promise or decide what my kid will learn next year. I'm not sure it will happen this way. So my advice to unschoolers is to explain what is unschooling, to explain how does it done, and to tell what kids really learn this way. But then there is a problem. There are inspectors that won't approve unschooling curriculum. The more experienced inspectors already learn what is unschooling from us, and then they can live with it somehow. But it's not easy to be unschooler and to write your real curriculum. After that, you have to describe the practical aspects. Who are the adults responsible to your kids, to the homeschooling? They want to know, how do you evaluate your kids' learning? They want to see schedule, and they want to know how the social need met. Again, it's not difficult to explain all of this, but you have to write it in words that a conventional educator will understand it. All these papers are the base for the home visit. To the home visit, there are two people will come to visit you. One of them is an inspector from the Ministry of Education. The inspector is the person who really decides about the permit. The second person is an attendance officer from the local municipality. He will check the environment, the house, the well-being of the kids. He wants to see that there is no abuse, that everything is more or less normal. This home visit can be very rough because you let into your house strange people that have a legal power to decide on your lifestyle, but usually they don't approve it and don't understand it. And so it's difficult, but somehow it's after I'm in this process a few years, I already know the people, and it's easier. But first visits can be difficult. Usually they will talk to the parents and will ask a few questions to the kids. So if there is a problem, I always can take the discussion back to my hands. There is one question they always ask. They smile to your kid and ask, don't you want to go to school? Aren't you curious? Don't you want just a visit to see how is it? And like first time I was shocked. Later on, I stopped it very rudely, like, you don't ask this question, my kid. Later on, my kids learned to just smile and nod, like, okay. And when my kids grew up, they started answering the question, and they just told, my friends hate school. So there is another issue that can arise in these visits. They are asking for products, for some learning products. And again, the new people, new inspectors will expect to see tests or notebooks, and we don't have them. The more experienced will do with my stories about the kids or pictures or something. So again, it's some kind of a postcode lottery. Depends on where you live. So all this process is doable, but it's like we don't like it. It's stressful. It's I feel like I have an annual assignment. It's like homework I have to submit. And this is the main reason that whoever can avoid it is avoiding it. Like if you're not registered or you moved from one place to another, you will wait until they will contact you. And then there are people that to write this assignment, for me, it's a bit difficult. I will neglect my kid for a couple of hours and write it. But there are people that can't write 5-6 pages of text. There are a lot of immigrants in Israel, and then there is a language problem. So we try to help each other, but it's not for everyone. It's very easy. About this, there are two fundamental problems in this process. One is that there's no standard. Every inspector has its own view, its own eye, and his own eyes, and will decide by his what he thinks and so on. Another thing that a lot of the inspectors don't know anything about homeschooling, especially not unschooling, and they get they don't get any training for this. So it's no, it's a problem we do want to fix, but it's not easy. There was one time the community did influence the regulations. In the year of 2007, a group of families applied to High Court. We asked we demand that the Ministry of Education will have reasonable regulations and stop fighting homeschool parenting. After applying to the court, suddenly it was the first time homeschooling was discussed in the Education Committee of the Knesset. The Knesset is our parliament. But it was the first time they tried to change the law. And even some representative of the homeschooling community could speak there. Then new regulations were written. The committee that worked on the regulations did listen to our people, to homeschool parents. You asked for tips. One of the things that worked well when talking to these people were to show pictures of children always working good. So and moreover, after that, they did invited some homeschool parents to talk to the inspectors. It was 1 year that the inspector did get some training for the job, but it's 15 years from there. From 15 years has passed, and all the inspectors they replaced because and now we have a bunch of new inspectors, and we have the same problem all over again. So once in a while, we try to connect the Ministry of Education and to offer help, to offer our knowledge, but they don't tend to cooperate. And so we try to live our lives with minimum contact and do the best for the kids. That's all. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Gila. There are quite a few questions in the chat about the training, which you did cover. And also just sort of asking, how do they appoint these people? Are they just somebody from the general public?
How do they contact us?
No, you know, the people they choose to do the inspections.
Are
they teachers or what's their background?
They are inspectors of the Ministry of Education. The school inspectors that got to deal with the homeschoolers, like a very small part of their job. It's like they do it very partial.
They have a broader job, and homeschoolers fall under that as part of it. So a little bit like some of our local authorities here in the UK, we have that happen.
Most of them were, of course, they were teachers, they were school headmasters, and they went up to be inspectors. So they're coming with the eyes of school teacher.
Yes. So please go back in the chat, and you'll see there's quite a few questions there for you. And thank you for sharing, because I can see that, you know, home educators in Israel actually need support, possibly from other countries as well, to come and give some advice. And you know, Tim was saying that it was similar in Taiwan before they started getting involved. So some good contact here for you who can maybe help you.
It's great.
But very good to hear from you. So I am now, let me take that away and just put myself back there for now. And I am looking for, let me just find Liz Guitonga from Kenya. So welcome, Liz. So glad that you can join us here. And Liz is also a very experienced home educator from Kenya. And we're going to hand over to you so you can explain how things work there for you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Juliet. And really nice to be in this forum. Nice meeting so many people from across the world. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I don't know that we have someone else from Sub-Saharan Africa, but you know, homeschooling is growing in Sub-Saharan Africa too. Boa, you're in South Africa, you're not counted. But you know, I guess we would say we are very young in homeschooling in this section of the continent, but we do have families that began homeschooling. We are one of the pioneer families, along with maybe 2 or 3 others, and we began about 22 years ago. So, you know, really modern homeschooling is very young here. Obviously, and I think for many cultures, when you think traditionally, parents brought up their children, mothers took care of their children in their early years and nurtured them and educated them in the ways of their culture and the skills they need to know. And as the children grew older, they now got into age groups and were educated under some kind of a mentorship, apprenticeship program with a mature adult watching over the older children. So in that sense, then, of course, homeschooling is not a new concept in our land, but definitely modern homeschooling has come as an interruption or as a deviation from what is considered as normal education. And even for the first families that began homeschooling, I think what we have in common is that we were in contact with people from other countries, especially from the US, Australia, where homeschooling had already taken root and had gotten exposed there. We got exposed to this form of education, and it sounded like something that made a lot of sense, and we thought we could give it a try, especially the main driving force being dissatisfaction with the public education system, and just the feeling that there is more in education. I am an educationist, trained as a teacher, and so homeschooling was not easy for me to take on because it came against everything I knew as an educator of how learning ought to happen. And I really fought the idea, but thankfully my husband was totally sold out, and he said, no, let's give it a try. And he really encouraged me to give it a try. Our daughter at that time was 3 or 4 years old. I don't remember exactly how old she was, but we were beginning to look at kindergartens. So she may have been about 3.5 to 4 years old. And I wasn't happy with what we were seeing out there anyway. So we thought, well, what's the worst that will happen? I'll do a bad job of it, and after a year, we'll put her in school then, and they'll fix up my mess, and I'll just move on to a career or something, to some employment. But thankfully, it was not a mess. And after 1 year of homeschooling, and my biggest terror had been, how will I ever teach this child how to read? Because though I was a teacher, I always taught high school students or students who already knew how to read. I never had the task of teaching them how to read. So that was my greatest fear, and I knew I'm going to really mess this up. So after about 1.5 years, and we were beginning to learn how to read, and I was experiencing success, and my daughter was thriving. She was learning, she was decoding, and that was a miracle for me. And therefore, I was not ready to put her in school. I thought, I need to finish what I've started. I need to enjoy this whole experience. And needless to say, as many of you have homeschooled would know, one thing leads to another, and 1 year leads to the next year. And soon the question was not, why should I take her to school? Was not, why should I homeschool, but rather, why should we take her to school? And we found great joy and satisfaction and family unity in learning right alongside my daughter, and also being able to, share with her our values, our life, and really she walking with us along the way. And we were blessed with 2 other children after that, and, they joined the fold. And so we've been homeschooling them for this long. That particular daughter is now proceeded to go into university, an international university in Kenya, and is now running her own consulting practice on counseling therapy. She studied counseling psychology. So we're very proud of her. Our second born son is in university in Rwanda, which is our neighboring country, a leadership university. And so that also, we are really grateful. And then our third born is 15 years old. So this is just a small kind of testimony to say that homeschooling has worked for this very ordinary family in Kenya, and therefore can work for any family in Africa, because Africa, we may think we don't have a lot of resources, we may not even see like we have a lot of options, but these are options that every family can choose to take, because we do have, as we know with home education, the resources are what we have around us. Definitely we have schools and children are learning the various subjects, but besides the subjects, we also have nature right around us. We have skills and talents in the children that we can nurture. And any parent, therefore, can choose to educate their child at home. There are resources that are useful, that are locally available, perhaps not necessarily written with the emphasis that a parent would like for their child, but it forms a baseline. And on that baseline, a parent can add on and say, well, would like to do a little more music in our class, in our school time, would like to do a little more nature study, would like to spend a lot more time visiting other people. Let's visit an old people's home. Let's get to know our country. And all those can be embedded in your school curriculum while meeting the very basic requirements set out by the government. So even for Africa, indeed, homeschooling does make sense. Now, one of the things that happened in Kenya as we embraced homeschooling, and though I said, we were like really a handful of families beginning, this is becoming a growing number, and we probably have about maybe 3,000 to 4,000 families, anecdotal. We really don't have, empirical data to verify how many families are homeschooling, but there's definitely a rise in interest, and there is a spread in knowledge of homeschooling as an option. More people are familiar with it, especially in our urban centers. Kenya is still about 70% rural, so there's still a lot of people in Kenya who have never heard about homeschooling or wouldn't ever consider it. And for me, I feel this is a lot of work to be done, because I think homeschooling is a good thing, and we would like to make that known to as many people as possible and equip them to be able to educate their children. So there's still quite a bit of uncovered ground in our country, in Kenya, and I think this depicts a lot of other African countries. But I was going to say that when we learned about homeschooling, we probably did a kind of a copy paste, and exactly the same way that we saw it done in the West, we kind of brought it here. And so it's a mother and her children sitting around their sitting room or wherever they would be and teaching their children, which has worked very well. But as I've matured in homeschooling and began thinking about this in a more contextual paradigm, I see that there are opportunities for us to adopt this model so that it speaks to our reality in our countries, where we have a lot of single family parents. We have a lot of we have a lot of families living below an income level that meets the basic needs of the family. We have people actually what would call living in poverty. Many of them, really hand-to-mouth kind of subsistence living. And I believe that homeschooling, being a very good thing, should not be limited by what is the financial ability of the family. And I think that calls for adopting this model and encouraging families to form communities of learning, where you can have 5, 6 families come together, and even if not necessarily every day of the week, but support each other in home education. And I think that does 2 things. It allows that family that really has only one income earner to still have some time to run outside and maybe in the morning buy some tomatoes and sell them. And they know that the other family is taking care of my children and is teaching them sports or whatever is going on at that time. So that's one of the things it does. It provides an avenue for people to continue providing for their family, even as their children are at home, and they will still have the opportunity to input in that homeschool by also contributing time. When she's not out there selling tomatoes in the afternoon, she'll come back and she'll teach those 10 children there of 3 families as the other mama goes out to run her little business. And secondly, it also validates that every parent has something to give to the children, because when we think of this 70% that is unreached, we still have a large percentage of people who did not get a strong basic education. We really are in Kenya just 2nd generation educated people in terms of formal education, only 2nd generation. And for many families, they're 1st generation. Their parents did not go to school. So, when you tell a parent like that, hey, you can homeschool your child, and she thinks, well, I don't even know English or the official language. How am I going to teach that? But when you have those communities of learning, then you have shared skills, shared knowledge. So I know English, or and I'll be able to pass on that to that group. Another mama who did not go to school, for literacy, as we call it, but she knows how to knit, and she's going to teach those children how to knit. Another father there is a great farmer, and he's going to teach those children how to farm. Everybody has been gifted with something that they can pass on to children. But when we define education narrowly as just the formal reading and writing, then I feel a lot of parents feel disenfranchised. And I've met many parents who will tell me, well, I didn't go to school, so I don't know much. But they know much. They are parents. They've been gifted with those children. They know everything. They have a lot that they can pass on to their children, and they can lean on the community to pass on some more. So I'll just say one other thing about homeschooling in Kenya, and that is just quickly touching on on the law, and just saying that the law, though the Constitution upholds the right for every child to have a basic education, that is preschool to end of high school, the Education Act has given a very narrow definition of what education is. And it says every pupil must attend a school or a government-approved institution that has been approved by the cabinet secretary. So that creates a problem because a school, in the understanding of government officials and everybody else, is a child puts on school uniform and gets out of the door every morning and comes back in the evening and reports to that institution, and a register is taken, And if they're not doing that daily, then they're in a boarding facility, a boarding school. So the Education Act totally has no sight of homeschooling, and that has caused a little problems. Some problems with homeschool families being visited by education officers who want to know, why is this child not in school? And unfortunately, for one of the families, it did lead to a charge in court, and he had to take his children back to school because the alternative was the government would take the children away from him. But as a result of that particular case, charge levied against his parents, he chose to put out a constitution petition, is what we call it, petitioning that the Constitution, the Education Act, should recognize homeschooling as one of the legitimate and legal forms of education in Kenya. So that case is still ongoing, and we are definitely very proud of that parent for fighting for his rights. And it is rights that have been given to us as parents by God. So when they're taken away from us, we cannot sit back. We should fight for them. We should stand for them, because what we are doing is really in line with what every government would want for its citizens, to bring up strong, independent, clear-thinking, intelligent, responsible citizens who would contribute to the building of our nations. And that's exactly what homeschool families are doing. And so I would like to encourage every parent out there, especially those in Africa, that you can homeschool. And even though the laws may not recognize homeschooling, we probably don't have laws that forbid homeschooling in Africa because it's just not yet envisioned. And so it is our duty to educate and get into those conversations where we demystify home education, but definitely go on ahead and homeschool. And through our organization, Veritas Education Africa and the East Africa Christian Home Educators, we are very ready to support not just Kenyans who want to homeschool, but also share knowledge and experience with other countries, and especially those in Africa who may be wanting to start off. We are very happy to lend support on how to homeschool for homeschool parents, and also for any other kind of legal engagements as we learn along the way. I'm learning a lot from the people here, and I think this shared learning is really good to assist us as we plod on this journey. Thank you very much, Juliet, for putting up this forum. This is very useful in spreading the word on homeschooling. Thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you, Liz, so much. I can see you've got some work cut out for you there in Kenya, it sounds like, and hopefully you've got a lot of people here you can meet with and chat with about ways forward to legalize home education in Kenya. So thank you very much. And I'm now going to bring in Boa van der Eems from South Africa, where I'm originally from, and where we began our home educating journey. So Boa, what's happening today, these days in South Africa? Yeah, please unmute.
Yeah, I'm not in the most ideal situation. I'm not at my home. I'm at an Airbnb in a small town, so please excuse the video quality. Yeah, you learn everything every day. I've just learned that South Africa is not part of Africa. So I guess we are sort of the northernmost province of the continent of Antarctica. But okay, so home education was legalized in South Africa in 1996 in the South African Schools Act that made provision for home education. The law was written in a way that it's unenforceable. So it's like a traffic sign. Let's say the government decides, oh, we must have speed restrictions on our roads. And they put a sign on there saying, please drive slowly. That is an example of an unenforceable law, because how do you know that you're guilty of an offense or not? So the homeschool provisions in the SA Schools Act were like that. And an unenforceable law is absolutely fantastic because it means you can do what you want. And so that means homeschooling parents had the freedom to do what they want. The law required them to register, but yet because of the unenforceable nature of the law, yet more than 95% of the homeschoolers didn't register. So that has been the situation until now, but that is now changing, and they are envisioning new laws in South Africa. And I'm going to present a short presentation on this new law and what we're doing about it. So I'm going to share my screen now. Okay. Can you see my screen? Yeah, I've titled the presentation, The Slow Birth of Bella Bill. So Bella stands for Basic Education Law Amendments Bill. So that is a bill that is, a law that is in progress. So I'm quickly going to go through the process that this law is going through and what we've done about it. So the agenda is the driving forces, what's motivating government, what are our concerns about this bill, and the process that it goes through. So when a government comes out with a new law, it should clearly specify what its intention is with this law. It wants to achieve a certain goal by making new laws. Now, unfortunately, when it comes to the SA Schools Act and the homeschooling provision, in the preamble of the Act, they don't give a clear description of what the intention is. Therefore, you have to look at the agendas of the political parties and statements by the minister. So just to give you an idea of what the intention with the legal changes is, I can just give you some show you some statements they made. So our government, the ruling party is the African National Council, the ANC, Congress, and the ANC, their policy is to implement the National Democratic Revolution. So most of our senior leaders received their training in the USSR, and they want to replicate the success of the USSR that they had since the revolution in 1970, and they want to repeat that. So they are busy with what they call the National Democratic Revolution, and they see education of one of the means to achieve that. So they use the education system to transmit their values to the new generation, and they don't hide it. It comes from their strategy and tactics document. Here is a minister, a statement from the Minister of Education in Parliament that says clearly she wants to make home education part of the school system. They want one uniform school system, and home education must become part of that. Here is another statement from the Minister of Education that says, it is my duty to help educate the people of South Africa on how to vote for the ANC, which is the ruling party. Here is a report from Umalusi, which is a government institution that monitors education. And they say that if you don't want, the only way not to follow the national curriculum should be to leave the country. So they really believe there should be one curriculum, all children should learn the same thing. Here is a statement from the Council of Education Minister. So we've got a semi-decentralized education system where there's a national minister and then there are provincial ministers, and they've been considering to scrap home education in 2017. The officials advised against this, but this is the type of thing that they want to consider. So if you can't scrap home education, at least make it more difficult. And there's another document that says that we should change our policies to make it more difficult, to make it a difficult choice to take. Opposing to this, we've got the driving forces of the homeschooling parents. They want to take full responsibility to choose the education of your child. I'm not going to expand on that. I think you all agree with that. So you see here the different driving forces in home education in South Africa. So what are our concerns about the new law, Bella? Is in effect, if you look at what the law says, it wants to transform home education into an unaffordable form of state education at home by prescribing curriculum and prescribing assessment, and then also outlaw all other education institutions other than schools. So in America, you've got a big trend of hybrid education with a diversity of educational institutions. They want to get rid of that, just one type of institution, namely a school. So obviously we are opposing these trends, and I've divided the battlefields into three parts. The one is when a law is being drafted, that are called the pre-parliament phase. So currently the Bella bill is in that phase. Then it goes to Parliament, it's debated there. Then you're going to petition Parliament to make changes to it. Then when it becomes law, it is signed by the President, it's now law. Then that is not the end of the war. The war just continues. It just, the battles are now not in Parliament anymore, the battles are now in the courts. So the battle for freedom just moves from place to place all the time. Now in South Africa, we are in the fortunate position that we were able to get involved in the making of the new law in the pre-parliament phase. And here is the slide of what has happened and what we've been doing in that phase. So the Department of Education started drafting the new bill. They appointed a task team to formulate amendments to the Schools Act in 2013 already. Fortunately, in South Africa, one of the rights in the Constitution is the right to administrative justice. And because of those administrative justice requirements, government has to publish things that they're working on for public participation. So they did publish the Bella Bill for public participation in 2017. The result of that is, now you must understand, the Bella Bill is not only about home education, it's about a lot of changes to the school system, but home education is part of it. Home education is just one article in the SA Schools Act. So there was a huge reaction from the public when this bill was published for comment, and a total of 5,000 letters were written to the Department of Education, and thousands of those 5,000 came from home educators. And I think that is quite an achievement, although home education in South Africa is less than 1% of the school population, we generated about 20% of all the objections to Bella Bill. So I think that campaign put home educators on the map in South Africa and generate a lot of media interest. After submitting all the engagements, the Department of Education went into stakeholder engagements. They had various meetings with teachers, unions, and also SGB organizations, that's school governing body organizations. And this time around, the Pestalozzi Trust, which is the Legal Defense Fund for Home Education in South Africa, was also recognized as a stakeholder to be consulted. And the Pestalozzi Trust was invited to submit more comments to the Bella Bill. And we also had a meeting with the minister. So after those stakeholders consultations, late 2019, early 2020, it went to an organization called NETLAC, which is a organization where unions, government, and business come together to discuss things. We don't have any influence on there. The next stage of the bill is to go to what they call Hslda, that's the Office of the Chief State Law Advisor. The Pestalozzi Trust used this opportunity to present a legal opinion on home visits, because one of the things that they envisage in the law is home visits. We got a senior advocate to give us a legal opinion to argue that home visits is an infringement of our constitutional right to privacy. And that was submitted to the Hslda. Then after that, a bill must go to what they call a SIAS process, that's socio-economic impact assessment study. We pointed out to government, listen here, you've got no idea what the impact of these changes are, because you've done no research on home education. You don't even know what the number of home educators are. It's impossible to do a social economic impact study without doing research. Go do your research first before you make any changes to the law on home education. And that is currently where the law is at present. So you see that red thing says we are here now. After the socio-economic impact study is finished, it will go to what they call a CHEM. That is the Council of the Education Minister. That's the minister, national minister, and the provincial ministers coming together to consider the law. And we're currently busy with a campaign, yet not against this national minister, but now to all the provincial ministers, to tell them, to present the message, you must talk to home educators before you approve that law in CHEM. And then it will go to social cluster, which is a group of ministries, and then it goes to cabinet for approval, and then it's submitted to the parliament. So this is the pre-parliament phase. And I think we've used every opportunity along the road of the bill in that pre-parliament phase to influence the law. And I think we've been quite successful, and there have been already a number of changes made to the law in this journey. After the pre-parliament phase, it will then go to parliament. That will take a few years. And then after parliament, it will become law. And as I said, then the battle just continues in the courts. So then you will challenge provisions in the law in the courts, and then the court will set aside those pieces on the law. So that is just what I want to share of what we've been doing to challenge the law that's going to make it restrict home education in South Africa on the continent of Antarctica. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Boa. I can see you've got a challenge still ahead of you, and you were telling us last night about how you've got so many home educators involved in dealing with the media and being able to respond, which is hopefully also helping just with public opinion, being able to get articles out in the media. Okay, so we are now going to Nadia, and I need to just find her. There she is. So Nadia will be talking about the situation in Jamaica, where she's had quite a lot of involvement with home educators in Jamaica. So over to you, Nadia.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. Are you seeing? Okay. So first, I'd just like to say good morning to everyone and good morning to all my fellow Jamaicans who have joined us on Facebook, watching the Facebook live stream. I know it's an early start for you guys, so thank you. Thank you for coming on. And I'm sure it's been quite interesting hearing what's going on in other countries. So yes, like everyone else, I'm just going to give you a little insight on homeschooling in the Jamaican context. All right, so like everybody else, I guess we have a same kind of pre-pandemic, since pandemic situation going on. So basically pre-pandemic, homeschool was kind of seen as a fringe activity. Not many people participated. And when it was spoken about, it was either criticism or questions, or you would see bits of, when there were like great successes, you would see bits of information about, oh, this homeschool family, achieved this. So you would see it smattering here and there in the newspapers, in the media, and so on. But in general, there wasn't much going on. There wasn't much interaction between parents and government, and there wasn't much about it happening in the mainstream. So since the pandemic, the request for homeschool has increased. There's been increased interaction between parents and the ministry. And interestingly or expectedly, the lines now have become blurred between homeschooling, long distance learning, and learning at home. And in trying to, I guess, manage that, what we're seeing is there's a stronger push from the ministry's end to kind of follow the national curriculum. So in our legal framework, basically homeschooling is legal. So the law states that it shall be the duty of the parent of every child of compulsory school age, which is about 6 to 18, 16, thereabouts. They should be getting some kind of full-time education suitable to the age and the ability of the child. But what's interesting is that it states that it should be satisfactory to the educational board of that area. So you see already there that there will be some form of control, I guess. And it's either regular attendance at school or otherwise. So otherwise is what would cover homeschoolers. So if you're not in school, you can be educated otherwise, which is in school, online, in a government school, prep school, by a church, whatever. So basically the process is that registration is mandatory. The application is submitted by the parents. An acknowledgement letter is sent to the parents to say you've met the basic requirements, and then an officer of the independent school unit, which is a group within the ministry that manages private schools, also manages homeschoolers. They will schedule a visit, which is now a virtual interview, but prior to that, it was an actual home visit, and it's with the parent, or if that parent is choosing to use a tutor of some kind, with the parent, the tutor, and the child. So at the moment, once you apply, you're granted provisional or conditional acceptance until they've done all their checks. So what are the requirements? 2 letters of recommendation for the parent. So I am a parent and I want to homeschool. I have to go get a justice of the peace, minister of religion, a principal, or an education officer to write me a letter to say I can homeschool my child or children. If a tutor is involved, you'll need a certified copy of the qualifications of the tutor. And if you're the parent, who will be educating, you also need to submit your credentials. And at the moment, that is, you must have at least be at least 2 levels above the level at which you're trying to educate. So if I'm educating what they would consider a 6th grader, I would need to have at least an 8th grade high school level of education. This was taken directly from like the documentation that you have to present. And for homeschool requirement, the ministry requires this. You must have a desk and a chair. You must have a curriculum, a lesson guide, a standard timetable. You must let them know what textbooks you're using. You must have notebooks, work tools, student portfolio with evidence of assessment, test instruments, student files, which is register. So how many days of class you've had, how many days were the children present in class, and to indicate when classes are held. So basically it is school in your house, because everything and the same structure at which a school operates, that is what they request or expect. So what has been the impact of this? So basically it has made some individuals second guess homeschooling. So because it seems like a lot and it's a lot of paperwork, and it might just seem easier to just send your child to school if the expectations are the same. So, and I think in general, the general feeling about registering or the mandatory registration is not a problem, but what parents fear or what people fear is the level of control that then comes with that. The practice or workaround, because I think as the previous speaker mentioned, policing it, we're in a situation where policing or monitoring is difficult. I mean, not different. So parents will register and do their own thing, or they'll register, submit the necessary paperwork and kind of follow it loosely. Or some parents might practice off the grid. It's important to note, I think another speaker, the speaker from Russia, I think mentioned it about the national exams. It's in our context, there are lots of exams and lots of diagnostic tests and things like that. So some parents will do them just in case they want to transition their children to high school, because in order to be placed in a high school, there is an exam. It's not an automatic, you go to the nearest school to you or something. You are tested, and based on your grades, you select a certain number of schools, you do the test, and based on your grades, you're placed in a school. So some parents will do the exams in the event that they want to transition to high school, what is called secondary school in the UK. So that's from year 7 to 12 or 10. So parents will do the exams just to have that backup. But because you want to do the exam to have the backup, you're kind of locked into the national curriculum to a certain extent. But you do have parents who will submit their own curriculum, or they will use curriculums from other countries, which is allowed, but they will kind of loosely follow the national curriculum alongside that in the event that they want to transition to a national high school. But what that does, though, it kind of restricts your freedom and how much you can do and what you can do, because it's a very intense program. So it can be limiting to all the other outside things that you might want to do, because most of us, our core reason for homeschooling is the freedom and to expose our children to things outside of that set, very rigid curriculum. But now, as it is, it makes it kind of tricky and difficult to straddle both situations, because you want to kind of keep on track with the national curriculum so you are not in any great trouble, but then that limits the time and freedom you have to do all the other things you might want to do, or be able to spend as much time with your child in an area that you want to spend some time on. So in general, or some of the other things to note is that there is a very active Jamaicas Association of Homeschoolers, which is a organized and registered body, and it supports homeschoolers. So it takes care of a lot of the socializing aspect of it, and a lot of support to new homeschoolers or just people in the process. So it's a group where if you need something or want something, you can get help there in anything. So it's very active and it's very supportive. And there are things like sports days that they will do. So just picture, if you know anything about Jamaica, you know Usain Bolt. So you know track and field is a big thing for us. So that's what sports day is. It's like a mini Olympics. And then all the homeschoolers will come together and compete. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, that didn't happen. But there is that. There are field trips where the group will come together and kind of travel together. So even though you're doing your own teaching and so on, following your teaching in your homes or wherever you choose to teach, there will be joint field trips so the kids can hang out, the parents can hang out together. And there are different workshops that a parent within the group might host, and then all the other children will attend, and so on. And it's a very open group, because yesterday actually there was a workshop on, and it was open to kids who go to regular school or who go to public schools to join as well. So unfortunately, that kind of action is not reciprocated. So schools are not necessarily open to homeschoolers coming in and doing activities or using their facilities. But the homeschooling community is very open to be like, come see what we do or come partake in our activities and so on. I guess as a kind of way of demystifying the whole process, in that we're normal people with normal kids and so on. So that's pretty much it, because I was told 15 minutes, so I kind of left room for questions.
Yeah, we've got a couple of minutes, but I think it sounds like people are making it work, even though you've got some constraints and challenges. Yeah,
the challenges and constraints, people are making it work, and there is some worry. I would be remiss to leave that out, because since the pandemic, because prior to the pandemic, you registered and you kind of went about and you did your thing, and there wasn't much interaction from the ministry. Since the pandemic, there has been lots of communication, but I wouldn't necessarily describe it as collaborative. It's almost like they want to come and say, this is the structure, this is what we want you to do, and not necessarily try to gain an understanding of why people want to homeschool. It's not just schooling at home. You know, there are reasons, whether it be religious or personal, or you want to advance your kid quickly, or you just want to take your time. There is no questioning or seeking of knowledge from the homeschool group to say, what is it you're trying to do, or why are you doing this? So let's collaborate. It's more of these are your limitations, like these are the rules, these are the laws. You need to work within these boundaries. So for people who I would call traditional homeschoolers, it is presenting a bit of a conflict, because these restrictions are now placing or causing you to question what you do, not in terms of the value or your beliefs, but how do I maneuver this or continue with this without getting in trouble? So there is concern about the increased involvement and what that might mean going forward.
Yeah.
And I think because of the wording of the law that it's now in existence, it makes it even a little more risky, because it does state that it needs to be approved by the education board. So what does that mean? Does that mean you tell me what to do? What is reasonable? Mm-hmm. What is reasonable is determined, well, according to the law, it's determined or should be determined by the education
Okay.
which takes away some of your freedom.
Yeah. So it's interesting that the law sounds very similar to the British, except they've inserted that bit in.
Yeah.
It is very, very
So-
similar. So I'm going to end your screen share here.
Okay.
And we're going to say thank you to Nadia for filling us in. There are some comments again in the chat, so please go and have a look and you can pick up on those. And I need to find, let me just go and find her. Where are you, Lil? Say hello, there you are. And then we'll say goodbye to Nadia. So Lil is going to tell us what things are like in Scotland. Thank you, Lil.
Hi, I'm Lil. I'm technically Elizabeth Lil, but everybody calls me Lil. I'm one of the trustees of Schoolhouse, which is our national charity for home educators. A lot of you will hear that my accent isn't in the slightest bit Scottish. I'm actually Welsh, but I've been living in Scotland for the last 6 years. I can strongly recommend it. You'll also see by my hair, I'm a bit of a dinosaur, so I'm going to try the screen share and hopefully it'll work. Bear with me. Great. So here we go. In Scotland, the good news is that school is not compulsory. So the great thing is that we've got lots of opportunities. We've got the Edinburgh Fringe, as you can see, all the things that go on in cities. We've also got the great outdoors. And so we have the happy little photo in the corner to show you that we're all dancing with joy that it's such a wonderful thing to do up here. Some of you might be intrigued because our legal framework is separate from the rest of the UK. That's not the result of devolution, that's just historically how it's always been. So our main Education Act is the 1980 Act, quite elderly now. And like the previous speaker, we have a duty, which is very similar, but for us, it is to provide the education rather than for the child to receive the education. I have to say, as a retired teacher, that seems a whole lot easier because I can provide it, whether they receive it or not is dubious, but however. The same act is quite good in that it says things like in the performance of the powers, pupils are to be educated in accordance with the wishes of their parents. So it's quite good on the human rights. It's built into the Act. Obviously, built into the Act, there is the possibility that they will need to intervene. So here we have section 37, which is when there's a problem or potentially a problem. When I first read this, I thought this was quite scary because it said about them being satisfied, which sort of puts all the power into their court. But the thing which is not in here, which is interesting, is that there is no duty to seek out home educators. There is no duty to monitor the education from outside of school. And also, if you look down to the part where it says about them needing to serve a notice because they're worried about the education, it actually sort of says that there might possibly be a reasonable excuse for your failure to provide education. So it's quite, or relatively, parent friendly. Life obviously moves on. So in 2000, there was a bill passed, which was actually about standards in schools, but that enabled what we have, which is now guidance, which also impacts. And in the guidance, there are a lot of nice things that are said. It reminds us all about our human rights. And it says that the authority should seek to support parents in the choices that they make by offering advice, clear and accurate information, and resources where feasible. That their wishes should be respected, and every effort should be made to resolve any issues without provision, about provision by a process of ongoing dialogue. So that's all quite nice. It states that the local authority do not have a duty to monitor. However, it then goes on and recommends that they effectively do that every year. So we're in a bit of a catch-22. And also when it says about being satisfied and all of that kind of thing, it says, please make contact every year, ask them what they're doing. And although it says they should only issue legal stuff, as in asking you to do it properly, formally, that you should only do it in extreme cases. Their extreme cases could be described as the authority has made every effort to secure the information and failed. And that's kind of where the difficulty lies, because parents are under no duty to provide any education at all. And the LAs don't have to do it, but are encouraged to do it. And then if we don't answer their inquiries, what are they supposed to do? They're supposed to serve a notice on us and ask for the information formally. So it's a very strange dancing arrangement. And so my major thought for everybody is never believe anything from the local authority, because they will tell you all sorts of things about how you're supposed to behave, what you're supposed to do, what their powers are. And often they don't fully know what their powers are. So we will carry on. If you happen to be known to your local authority and you have to chat to them, then the kind of things they are looking for are up here on the screen. They're all fairly straightforward. They allow for all manner of home education possibilities. The good thing about it is that it is explicit in saying there is no need to replicate any school subjects or level of attainments, and there is no need to be worried about acquiring qualifications. That said, we recently had a lady who was trying to deregister, or not deregister, withdraw her child from school, and the local authority was hassling her about how she was going to get the child some qualifications, and the child was only about 11, I think. So it's written in print. What they do in practice is quite variable. Now, if you're like me, you are below the radar, because my child was never in school here. We have also moved to a new local authority. There are lots of cases where you do not need to be known to the authorities, and I would certainly recommend trying to stay that way. It makes life so much easier. If your child is already in school, then you can get them withdrawn. And this is where, again, it's quite interesting here, because the primary duty is the parental duty, and yet the local authority has a duty of care. And so they tend not to allow you to withdraw until you've produced some sort of education plan. I would say theoretically, in that you only have to provide it, you can provide any old plan and then say in 3 months' time that it didn't really suit your child. So there are ways of jumping through these hoops. They are clear that consent should not be withheld, and that the process should take no longer than 6 weeks. Those 6 weeks can be quite interesting for people when you've got children being bullied or those sorts of things. So again, the guidance is much kinder than what frequently happens in practice. They are not supposed to unreasonably withhold consent. The main thing that they should be looking for are child protection concerns. And then it's a very odd situation, because the consent is only needed for the withdrawal from school, and it's not consent to home educate. You have a right to home educate. So the kind things that they say in the guidance that frequently don't happen is that in the period between receipt of an application to withdraw a child and the decision being issued, the authority should take a reasonable approach to attendance procedures. In most cases, it would be inappropriate to initiate or pursue attendance procedures in respect of a child awaiting consent to be withdrawn. So I read that as, if you've got any good excuse for them not being in school until you get the letter, you can argue that with your school. Certainly when my daughter started school, I had that conversation with her head of year saying I would want to withdraw her immediately. And he said, as long as we're talking, it'll be fine. So Flexi schooling is still a thing in Scotland. It can be negotiated through the local authority, and it's really at the behest of the head teacher. There are quite a lot of children who do it, although bizarrely, it's very much in certain areas. So where I live in Fife, we have more than 50% of the children in the whole of Scotland are flexi schooling in this local area. But it goes very well here, so maybe it'll set a trend. Now, the practice side of it, as I say, it's all a postcode lottery. There are some places where the local authorities are kind. There are some cases where they are slightly more hostile, should we say. If you're unknown, that's great. If you are known, most people do end up producing annual reports. I would love somebody, I've never been in the position, to actually see if they can counter that and to see if we can have the conversation about there being no duty on the LA to keep hassling them every year. But as far as I know, it hasn't happened. Everything here is very variable. If you live in Edinburgh, if you live in Glasgow or the Central Belt, you'll have lots of other home educators. The rest of us, it's all rather more spread out. So you can have an awful lot of transport involved, trying to find people the same sort of age. At the moment, it's obviously much easier because there's a lot of stuff online, but it's a brilliant place to home educate. There's a lot of stuff happening. The downside is our legal framework might change very soon because they might be issuing more guidance. And also we've had a few troubles I will come to later, but I'm going to cheer you all up with happy pictures of people home educating, because then I can tell you about the quirky bits of Scotland. Obviously you can do the, we are educating in a, we are staying at home educating kind of way. And I've got the nice picture of my son on the tractor because until fairly recently, it was legal for 14-year-olds to drive tractors on the road. And it is still legal in the Education Act to keep children over the age of 14 home if they're needed at home, which is presumably the whole kind of might be needed on the croft thing, or might be needed to help with something like that. Also, children here have all sorts of legal powers from the age of 12. I need to speed up, I can tell. Mainly, we do things in groups if we can. Here are some of the things that we did. And you can do, this was a set of courses. So I'm going back to remind you to do that because, here we go, more important. In 2014, they tried to introduce legislation here about a named person. This was to give somebody an overview of your child's well-being. This was all the kind of nicey stuff that they tried to do before the Badman Review hit England. So it was all to do with individualized learning, and this person would look out for your child in school. They could share information between the doctor, the social services, all this kind of stuff. Lots of people got very upset about that. They did the writing to the MPs or MSPs, I should say, up here. And then various people took the whole piece of legislation to judicial review. That wasn't just home educators, it was a number of charities and individuals. And in the Court of Session, it was thrown out, but they were allowed to appeal it. So this is a very expensive process. So come and hear me talk tomorrow about that sort of thing. But eventually, when it was taken to the UK Supreme Court, it was thrown out. So now we still have a named person, but it's supposed to be voluntary. So again, I come back to this whole thing. because it's supposed to be voluntary, but as is frequently the case, local authorities haven't caught up with that. They're still trying to do a lot of data sharing. They're still trying to impose the person who is more in charge of your child than the parent. And quite where we go from there, and new guidance coming through, who knows? But today it is lovely home educating in Scotland. So thank you.
Is that okay? You're all done, Lil. Okay, I was
I'm
just sending
done.
you a message to let you know you were out of time, but
Yes.
well done. Well done. So yeah, there are some similarities and some differences with England, aren't there? So now I'm going to be calling up, oh, where's she gone now? I had her. Debra, where have you gone?
Hello.
Yeah,
Hi, everybody.
I'm trying to find you so I can just there you are. Okay, so I just want to add you and then I'll say goodbye to Lil. It works easier that way, then I kind of can keep track a little bit. So we want to welcome Debra Bell from the USA. And I just want to say about 20 years ago, I think I had Debra Bell's book, The Ultimate Guide to Homeschooling. So it's a real honor, Debra, to have you join us here today.
Oh, thank you very much, Juliet. This has been wonderful for me as well. So let me get started here. I appreciate everybody's attention. Yes, I'm a longtime homeschooler here in the United States, actually a pioneer. Started homeschooling when it was illegal. Today, I continue to serve homeschoolers through offering online classes through debrabell.com called AIM Academy Online. And I'm also on the board of the Global Home Education Exchange, which I sit on with a number of panelists that have already presented today. And just want to recommend that organization to you in the future. So let me introduce you to my family. These are my children and their spouses. So my two sons on the top and my two daughters on the bottom, they were all educated K through 12 at home. They all have college degrees. They all have jobs. They're all married. And the greatest measure of success, they're all still speaking to me. So two of my kids married, also homeschool graduates. And I have 6 grandchildren and they're all being home educated as well. As I mentioned, when we started home educating, it was illegal in Pennsylvania, where I live. So I am located on the east coast of Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And I'm not sure what you know about homeschooling in the United States, but in all, it's regulated at the state level. So we have 50 different homeschool laws. And when I started, my superintendent of schools in the town where I live, we were the first family to homeschool, said I could homeschool because I was a certified teacher. I had substituted in the schools here and I was known, but nobody else can. So don't tell anybody. Oops, I might have let the cat out of the bag. But we were a part of making it legal here in Pennsylvania, and kindergarten, when my twin boys were 5, was primarily spent at the state capitol, pictured here. We had many field trips to our state capitol. And on the day that homeschooling law in Pennsylvania passed, and I believe this record still stands, it unanimously passed in both the House and the Senate of the legislature of Pennsylvania, and all the legislators stood and gave a standing ovation to the parents and the homeschool kids who were in the gallery watching on. So I credit this experience with why my sons are very politically active today. Not always on the issue that I agree on. So there's a lot of political diversity, but I've raised very politically engaged children. So I want to mention HSLDA, Homeschool Legal Defense Association. and credit them with being really responsible in no small measure for the fact that homeschooling is legal in all 50 states and territories in the United States today. And I really think from my experience in the Global Home Education Exchange Board, which represents about 18 countries currently around the world, I mean, I do think that this is the kind of organization that is well worth our effort to help develop and support, because without a team of attorneys and knowledgeable constitutional scholars who were working as part of their job or occupation in order to advocate for homeschool freedom and parental choice and rights, we would not be in the situation that we're in today, where, as I mentioned in the chat, it looks like during COVID, 5 to 6 million children were home educated. So as far as, you know, giving everybody a crash course in what homeschooling is all about, and granted, COVID was certainly not at all the ideal situation, but it certainly does, I think, give us an awful lot of momentum going forward in the future for continuing to push for the rights of parents to oversee their children's education, and that they are the ones who are best positioned to have the child's best interest at heart. So what is it like where, excuse me, I wanted to just kind of summarize what you might find in the 50 states legislatively. You might have to report to the authority you are homeschooling. So in Pennsylvania, every year I had to file an affidavit saying I was going to home educate my children. That year it was simply going down to the notary and paying $5 and getting it authorized and witnessed and just dropping it off at the school. We might have to document the days and the subjects of instruction in some kind of log, you know, so some people just check it off on a calendar, or others buy a teacher planning book, some more traditional type notebook, and write down what they did. We might have to have our kids take a test, standardized tests. Might have to have our children be evaluated by a professional annually or semi-annually, or we might have to do nothing. So there are places in the United States where you don't even have to notify the authorities that you're home educating. So we have quite a range. What I do really, really value about our laws, and one of the focuses of HSLDA and those people who took it upon themselves to really work for our legal freedom, is none of our states do we have requirements to use an approved curriculum. So even though plenty of our states, you have required subjects that you have to teach, there's no, you know, I had to teach Pennsylvania history, I had to teach US government, or I had to teach Algebra 1 at some point in my kids' education. I wasn't told what curriculum to use. And that's probably why you see such proliferation of curricula coming out of the United States, because we had the opportunity, and we weren't forced into using or following national standards. And because we're very well politically organized in the United States, we have also been a part of that. We've also been a part of trying to advocate for not having a national curriculum. So we have partnered with other like-minded individuals, like the school choice people. And so we have a lot of political clout in terms of being able to let our legislator know, like, we don't want to have national testing and we don't want to have national standards. Now, I know that from sitting on the GHEX board, it makes me realize what makes us unique in the United States. I realize that the fact that we have all of these kind of at state level or province level laws can seem unusual, and it can be kind of problematic. But the other upside of it is that as I'm able to see like what works and what doesn't work, and the fact that there were states who got political freedom ahead of other states and their kids seem to be okay, could be used then, as evidence that homeschooling doesn't hurt children. And it allowed us to, slowly over the course of about 8 to 10 years, turn the laws around. So what was I under in Pennsylvania? We're considered to have one of the most burdensome homeschool laws. And I'm just a person who likes to make lemonade out of lemons. And I didn't find it to be that burdensome, but this is an example of what the highest regulations in the United States might look like. I had to have my kids tested in 3rd, 5th, and 8th grade using an approved standardized test. We had to annually have our portfolio of the child's work, which showed progress, reviewed by a professional educator. We had to show that we gave 180 days of instruction in the required subject areas. But the family gets to hire the evaluator. It's not appointed by the state or the local authorities. And so I am a certified teacher. I was able to provide evaluations to homeschool families, for example, in our community. And my grandson just had his evaluation yesterday, his first. He's 7 years old, and my daughter made a huge event out of it. My husband and I went to Philadelphia, and she had a little graduation ceremony for him, and he went off to his evaluator, and she thought she'd be back in a half hour. Well, 2 hours later, they come home, because he wanted to show her everything that he had learned last year. So I think, for kids, it really can be turned into a wonderful experience if you have a friendly evaluator who's giving, who's approving and supporting and really making it into a special event. Those reviews are then turned into the school district, and the test scores are turned in to the school district. So that's what I dealt with here in Pennsylvania. And I just wanted to summarize why I think homeschooling is broadly accepted in the United States, even pre-COVID, but now post-COVID more than ever. But what were the factors? And I think that, I hope that maybe this applies to some of you in your situation. First of all, we have a strong framework of individual liberties in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And so because we had that in our founding documents, we've really been able to argue those from a position of religious liberty and freedom of speech and freedom of association. We've really been able to build good case law around, in particular, the Bill of Rights. We've had high profile success stories and very positive press coverage of homeschooling in the early years. So, people like Tim Tebow or Jada and Will Smith have homeschooled, and we've had all these kids who've gone on to Harvard and things like that. We have a strong body of homeschool research showing positive outcomes. And I think that, getting behind researchers and scholars is so critical. How I serve on the GHEX organization is I'm chair of the research committee, and we are now meeting regularly with global scholars, emerging scholars, trying to help them research homeschooling and frame studies that serve the homeschool community, starting from a point of reference that we want to be, we're curious about homeschooling, and we want to find out what is motivating these parents and how they're doing it, so that what we come up with is going to be beneficial to the homeschool community. Also being very civically engaged in our homeschool community. For those of us who don't mind being civically engaged, I know not everybody is really eager to be an extrovert and to put your homeschool life out there for others to witness, but those who have really been able to make a way possible for everybody. And just finally, our homeschool grads have distinguished themselves, and the proof is in the pudding. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Debra. It is interesting to see how it works for different countries. Here in this country, I must say, we push against that kind of sort of evaluation purely because, who ensures that that person is equipped actually to do the job and to do justice to home education.
Yes, I
So,
just want to say
yeah.
I'm not endorsing
Yeah.
that. I mean, they just
It's
felt
the way it is for you.
it's the way it is for
yeah.
us. Yes.
Yeah, and yeah, I would love to see them try that here. Anyway, you might have noticed that we've been moving from the east further west, and then we will come back to the British Islands. So now we're going to add Gail Hanlon from Canada, who I've recently come to know. And the interesting thing, the thing that sort of made me immediately notice Gail, is that her email address is almost identical to mine in that she uses Learn Free as well. So we were immediately connected through that, and welcome Gail. She's also a veteran home educator and has a lot of knowledge about what is going on in Canada.
Well, hello, everyone. I am obviously Canadian, and I live 10 minutes from this. So it's the wonderful part about being in Canada is it's very much like Scotland. I mean, in our homeschooling, so everything that she said and here. So so primarily, there's one definition that I think is the most important for Canadians and for people in Canada to understand, and for educators here, is that the term compulsory education in Canada, and I believe everywhere, means that the state is compelled to provide education for its citizens, not necessarily that its citizens are compelled to take advantage of it. So with that in mind, Canada has 10 provinces and 3 territories where home education is, there is something in all the different legislation and acts that either provide for it or just don't mention it at all. And so it's, you know, somebody can't say you can't do that because there's nowhere in the law that it says you can't, because it's not even mentioned. So when you look at compulsory education, most provinces do have a children should. We have a lot of shoulds, a lot of very few musts. I'm just looking at the Newfoundland and Labrador legislation right now, which says a person is entitled in that year to an education program. So it's an entitlement. It's something that you are offered by your government. Here, have this lovely, you know, education plan. If you choose to not accept it, that's okay. You don't have to.
It's polite Canadians is what I've said in the chat.
We're very polite, but not very activist, I gotta say. So I'm in Ontario, and in Ontario, the part of the Education Act, which is why I always encourage people to read the education law, because what people say and what they can actually back up are 2 completely different things, as our lovely friend Lil mentioned. So in Ontario, the Education Act states in section 21(2)(a), a person is excused from attendance at school if satisfactory instruction is being provided at home or elsewhere. There is no definition of satisfactory instruction, and there can't be, because there's you know, Hasidic Jewish family, Mormon families, Muslim families. We've got you know, every nation in under our flag here, and so there is no definition of satisfactory instruction, and it can be at home or elsewhere. So that, and the biggest word in that whole section is the word is. A person is excused. It doesn't say that they may be excused. It says that they are excused. And who would excuse a child? The parents. Now, there are policies that the Ministry of the Boards of Education develop that don't say that. they believe that they have the right to excuse a child. So if you listen to the school boards or the schools, they're reading from their job description and not necessarily the law. And so this impacts home educators depending on where you live. So I think it was Tim that was talking about British Columbia. In British Columbia, we've had over a number of years, there was some attempt to fund and apply funding for home educators. And at first, that money came with no restrictions. You could use it on whatever you wanted. Their primary purpose was actually just to get homeschoolers to sign up. They wanted those names and those people on a list. They gave them the money and they could use it on anything. And over the course of several years, the limitations were added until about 4 years, 5 years down the road, you could only use it on government approved curriculum, government approved teachers, as tutors. And so that limited those people in British Columbia with that money attached. Currently, there are many different programs that work with the Ministry of Education in BC, and one of which, if they provide you with the a weekly set of lesson plan stuff, lessons and questions and things that you may do if you want to. And you don't have to. If you want to get credit and you want to turn them in to get a high school diploma, then you may, but you don't have to. Unschooling is huge in Canada. And we have a wonderful resource in a lady named Judy Arnall, who has written a book called Unschooling to University. And that's the name of the webpage as well, where she documents all the alternative ways for students and kids to get into university and post-secondary schools without ever having to have been to school. There's also a webpage that is universityadmissions.ca that also has all the different ways that you can get into post-secondary school. So I've had success helping a 12-year-old get into the actuarial sciences program, a 13-year-old get into the medical program, and a 15-year-old get into the law program, just to mention a few. So there are always back doors. And the biggest problem for home educators is believing the system and the people in the system that are telling them what they have to do. So when I refer people back to the policy itself, at first, if it's a policy, it's just a policy, it's not law. But with COVID, there have been so many people, of course, our numbers have tripled, if not more, during COVID. But now that 12 to 18-year-olds are approved to get the shot, the vaccine, a lot of parents are saying no. A lot of kids are saying no, I don't want the vaccine. So that's the next challenge for people. But most places in Canada, there are no requirements to register as a home educator. But you can choose to do so. There are, as I said, the policies that may say you should register. You know, it's just common courtesy if you're taking your child out of school to let them know that your child you're either withdrawing your child or you are de-enrolling your child or deregistering. I like to advise parents to use the term, I'm withdrawing my child as we have chosen a private alternative, because that term covers a lot of things that and people will take that as it may. They'll infer if it's a private school or something like that. Now, that is also the option, is that there are homeschooling private schools. In Ontario in 1983, There were about 20 of these schools that were started by the Ministry of Education so that they could count, like purely for statistical purposes. So we are called non-inspected private schools, and I've operated one that started in 1983, and I took it over in 1996. How am I doing? I can't see. My timer is backwards.
It's 5:26.
Yeah.
Keep going, because
Okay.
I do want you to explain what you told me about the private school situation.
Yeah, so in Ontario, because that is my expertise, in other provinces, I'm sure it's similar, but with our private schools, we have to have a minimum of 5 registered full-time students. And so, for instance, for my school, you just notify the government. It is a notice of intention to operate the private school that you provide the government. They do not have the authority to deny it, and they don't have the authority to approve it. It is simply notifying the government. Then the government will put that school, as long as all the check boxes are, you have to have those 5 students, you have to have a curriculum, but it doesn't have to be a single curriculum. So for me, my families all homeschool and unschool the way they want to. So that is my common curriculum, is allowing the parents the choice to use whatever method they want. We also have voluntary attendance. So, but that means that parents from all over the world can register with this kind of school and be registered as a private alternative. Debra, you probably know of West River Academy in California. They do exactly the same thing. If you look up westriveracademy.com, that is an example of the type of school that I'm talking about. So basically, you tell the government that your intent to operate a private school. And so we have a lot of micro schools and pods that start up, not necessarily registered with the government, but they can. There's nothing saying that they can't take kids into their home from other families and do whatever they do. It's no different than daycare. It's just different ages. Tactics to use to negotiate. I can tell you that the important thing that parents have is knowledge. They know the law and in their area. And to be very clear about that, what other people may say the law says, ask for proof. Always ask for, show me exactly in the law where it says that. Always get backup. And the tactics that the government uses to try and get us back, they're actually making personal phone calls to families now, saying, what can we do to get you to bring your children back to school? Because in Ontario, the policy that I was talking about is that they ask you to provide a letter of intent of homeschooling. And that letter of intent, they then follow up with like 24 pages of documents that they want you to fill out that are not legally required at all. So I'm with the Ontario Federation of Teaching Parents, which there are similar organizations all over Canada in different provinces. But here, the Ontario Federation of Teaching Parents, it's ontariohomeschool.org online. And we are active for families in Ontario. We keep a watchdog eye on the boards of education because they are very intimidating. They like to tell parents who they think are ignorant of the law what they have to do. And they will use the wrong terminology, and they will be very forceful. So unless a parent goes on to one of the homeschooling groups on Facebook or Reddit or something like that, they may feel like they have to jump through these hoops. But a lot of the parents that are coming in now from homeschooling are doing so, or from the education system, are because they're fed up with remote learning and virtual learning. So the only issue with the private schools that I will say is that they don't have to hunt us down and sue us for whatever. They can just remove our names from the list and say, oops, it's an error. You're no longer on the list. And unless I want to take it to court to get back on the list. So I know I'm out of time now, but I'm happy to answer any other questions in the chat, or I can post my email as well, which is on the Hslda app. So
yeah, and I wanted to quickly add, because the thing that fascinated me is you said that some countries where home education is illegal, home educators are registering with these private schools, and that's kind of being accepted.
Absolutely. I myself, we lived in 3 different countries. My grandfather, who was in charge of me, he just put me wherever he wanted me. That's why I knew that it was the parents' right to decide what happens with their child, not the state. If you move from one province to another, they're not going to follow you and make sure you enroll in school. In Canada also, if you've never been to school, you have no obligation to register, even when your child is 6 and they have that compulsory whatever in whatever law is, whatever province it is. So under the radar is always out there, a lot of people under the radar.
Great. Thank you so much, Gail. And it's just been really delightful to have you join us today. Thank you so much. And you can find her, you contact her also through the app, as she said. So I'm going to just remove that spotlight. I need to spotlight myself again because I am screen sharing Ireland. It's a pre-recorded video. So let's hope this will work. I'll make sure I share sound.
Let's start at the very beginning. Article 42 of the Irish Constitution grants parents a constitutional right to home educate their children. And up until relatively recently, exercising that right was very straightforward. You simply didn't send your child to school and you commenced home educating. However, after very little consultation with the home education community, an act was passed through the Irish Parliament. This was the Education Welfare Act 2000. The Act provided for the establishment of the NEWB, the National Educational Welfare Board. One of the functions of the board was to create and maintain a register of all children receiving education at home. The Act also provided for the establishment of a framework for an application and assessment process for home educators. This now meant that for the first time, a parent wishing to lawfully exercise their constitutional right to home educate must first make an application to the government body seeking permission to do so, and undergo an assessment process so as to determine if the child was or was likely to receive a minimum standard of education. It is worth noting that such minimum standard has never been defined by legislation, nor adequately through the courts. In 2013, Hslda Child and Family Agency was created. Hslda is the National Child Protection Agency of Ireland. Section 72 of the Child and Family Agency Act dissolved the NEWB and conferred its powers and functions to Hslda. This now meant that whereas previously home education had been under the remit of the Department of Education, it was now to be overseen by the Child Protection Agency of Ireland, a move which many home educators both at the time and now feel is highly inappropriate. Fast forward to 2016. and the time came for me to make an application for registration for my eldest child. I submitted my application in accordance with Section 14.4 of the Education Welfare Act. Hslda acknowledged receipt of my application. However, they declined to process my application should I not be willing to complete their R1 form. I could not find any legal basis for completing this form, and so I requested said basis from Hslda. Hslda never, to this date, have provided me or any other parent with a legal basis to substantiate why this was a prerequisite to the application process. A major concern in completing the R1 form that was available at the time, aside from the fact that it was not legally required of parents and, in my opinion, was an overreach of the government body Hslda, was that in completing the R1 form, a request was made that obliged parents to sign a consent declaration section. This consent declaration section had the effect of granting the Child Protection Agency of Ireland unlimited access to one's family home and children indefinitely, a move which I was not willing to cooperate with. Despite there being no legal basis compelling me as a parent to complete the R1 form, Hslda were insistent. They demanded that I complete said form and said that if I did not do so, they would refuse to process my application. I refused to be coerced. As a result, Hslda refused to process my application for registration, thereby inhibiting me from lawfully exercising my constitutional right to home educate my child. Hslda were of the opinion that as a home education application was not being processed by them, my child was therefore legally required to attend school. I, on the other hand, was of the opinion that I was lawfully home educating my child, and Hslda was the impediment to me fully exercising that right. Nevertheless, Hslda issued us with a school attendance notice as per Section 25.1. The school attendance notice placed a legal requirement upon us as parents to cause our child to attend a school of the state's choosing. Non-compliance with this notice was a criminal offence. These notices are usually issued in extreme cases where a child has been truanting from school for a significant period of time, not where a parent is seeking to home educate their child. We were of the opinion that as we had made an application in accordance with Section 14.4 of the aforementioned Act, that Section 17.2b of the Act applied, therefore rendering the said notice as void, and that non-compliance with the notice was not an offence. Despite communicating this with Hslda, they were not receptive or open to any dialogue whatsoever. Despite many months of litigating with Hslda in an attempt to resolve this matter without it escalating further, they were unwilling to engage. Numerous letters were sent urging Hslda to provide a legal basis for their actions. Legal basis was never provided. To date, has never been provided. When we did receive a correspondence from them, we were very excited to open it, only to realise that it was in fact a summons. We were now being prosecuted under Section 25.4 of the aforementioned Act. Our crime, supposedly, was that we had failed to cause our child to attend school, an offence which could carry a prison term of up to 1 month. In court, Hslda argued that our application for registration was not valid on the basis that we did not complete their R1 form. They said that without completion of this form, they were unable to process the application and proceed to the assessment stage, and that without an assessment or assessments, concluding that our child was or was likely to receive a minimum standard of education, that he or she could not be named on the register as receiving education at home. Therefore, our child must be considered as one who is not receiving home education, but rather one who is truanting from school. Or in other words, that we as parents had failed to provide our child with a minimum standard of education. However, we of course were of a differing opinion. We believe that our application for registration was valid and that as it had been made in accordance with all relevant pieces of legislation, Hslda had no legal basis on which they could refuse to process it. We pointed out that the R1 form had no legal basis compelling parents to complete it, and that a decision by parents to elect not to complete it did not render a parent's application as invalid. We further pointed out that Hslda had a statutory duty to cause an assessment to be carried out as soon as practicable after receiving an application, a duty which they had failed to fulfil. We also highlighted that Hslda had intentionally and knowingly inhibited us from lawfully exercising our constitutional right to home educate. Despite all of this, the lower court found us guilty. But, not being one for throwing in the towel that easily, we appealed the case to the higher court. The higher court found in our favour. Finally, justice. We were vindicated. No longer were we criminals. This was such a victory. After nearly 20 years of parents being required to complete a form that wasn't necessary by law, after them being coerced into giving consent for assessments that was not necessary at the time of application, finally, there was some clarity. Finally, a benchmark which held Hslda to account. The court held that our application for registration had been valid all along, and that Hslda must process it. They also held that the R1 form was not a necessary prerequisite for the application process, and amongst other things that Hslda's requirement for birth certificates was also not legally required, and that preliminary assessments, for example, did not need to be carried out at the family home, or in fact, in person at all. This was a great victory, and a pushback against a government body who was given an inch and decided to take a mile. It had been a long and hard battle, and we were quite relieved that it was over, and that we didn't have to go to jail, although it would have been quite an interesting story to tell our grandchildren. For the best part of a year, parents enjoyed making applications for registration without the need to complete the R1 form. The case had pushed back against Hslda's encroachment on private family life, and parents now had a newfound liberation to make applications without giving away personal and unnecessary details to a government body. Then, of course, the global situation developed. And as with many countries around the world, pieces of legislation were being introduced left, right and centre to facilitate lockdowns of varying kinds. In Ireland, one of the quickest and most effective ways of introducing new pieces of legislation is by way of statutory instrument. Statutory instruments are a type of secondary legislation, whereas an act, such as the Education Welfare Act, is a type of primary legislation. So what's the difference, and does it really matter? Well, the Act started life as a bill, and this bill was available to the public to read. They could make comments and share their views with their local public representatives. Public representatives would then attend the Irish Parliament for rigorous debate about the bill, and this is where constituents' voices could be heard. It was a way for the average Joe like you or me to have some sort of input into the future laws that might govern us. After much debate, if the majority of public representatives were in favour of the bill, it would eventually be passed into law and be a legally binding act on the Irish statute books. That is democracy, and it is a system that many European countries have used for hundreds of years. A statutory instrument, or SI, however, is far less democratic in nature. A statutory instrument cannot be read by members of the public prior to it becoming legally binding, as is the case with a bill. A statutory instrument is not read by members of the Irish Parliament before it becomes legally binding, as is the case with the bill. A statutory instrument is not debated in the Irish Parliament before it becomes legally binding, as is the case with the bill. And lastly, a statutory instrument is not voted on by public representatives, as is the case with a bill. Yet, despite this undemocratic method of making new pieces of legislation, the Irish government has elected to use this method as the primary method by which it has governed the Irish people for the best part of a year. It is by this method, as of August 26, 2020, by way of Statutory Instrument 330 of 2020, that the Irish government, in the midst of a global crisis, whilst the Irish people were frightened, desperate, frantic, and distracted, that the government seized an opportune moment to change the home education law. In essence, SI 330 enshrines the R1 form into law. We believe this is Hslda's attempt to circumvent the court's decision and directly override the court's findings by way of statutory instrument. Hslda were aware that they had no right of appeal through the courts. We believe this demonstrates Hslda's unwillingness to accept justice, their disregard for the judiciary, democracy, and parents' constitutional right to home educate. We are confident that there is a legal basis on which SI 330 may be successfully challenged. Various statutory instruments have been introduced over the course of the past year or so to restrict, regulate, and limit citizens' rights and freedoms. And though these haven't been introduced specifically in relation to home educators, they have had a prejudicial effect on the home education community. For example, at a time when one could leave their home for a reasonable excuse, such as to avail of education at an educational facility, home educators could not do the same. This meant if a child was to leave their home to attend a public school for the purpose of education, this was permitted. But if a home-educated child was to attend a science workshop on a regular basis of a Friday afternoon at their local community centre, this was prohibited. This is my concern of the frequent use of statutory instruments. If these regulations had been brought in by way of a bill, the public would have been consulted. Public representatives would have debated the matter. The home education community, home education advocates, home education organisations would have all been consulted prior to this becoming legally binding. At a time when our children have suffered so greatly, to restrict the socialisation and access to education of home educators compared to those of school-going children is fundamentally wrong. Citizens around the world have compromised on their fundamental rights, freedoms, and liberties for far too long. At what point do we, as home educators, decide enough is enough? At what point do we say, no, I do not consent? Are we going to wake up one day and find that our constitutional right to home educate is gone? Or are we going to be a champion for home education, for our children's future, for fundamental rights and freedoms? I can hear the voices of seasoned home educators in my ear, who prior to the 2000 Act warned us, slippery slope, slippery slope. Thank you to everyone for taking time to listen to me. I really hope you're enjoying the conference. Please stay tuned, there's so much more to come. God bless everyone. Bye-bye.
Okay, so now I need to just find Randall. I know he's there somewhere.
I'm here. Can you see me flashing yellow?
I got you. Okay, so Randall is going to sort of wrap us up by looking at England and Wales. You know, Randall, we will allow you to go your time that you're allowed. Okay, I think we're fine.
Okay, Juliet.
Yep. Let me get rid of myself.
Thank you. I'm just screen sharing. There we go. I trust you can see that, folks. Who am I? Hang on, I need to click that. That's it, we're on there now. I'm Randall Hardy. That's my website. I'll just briefly tell you about that because I'm at the end of this 3-hour marathon and I'm going to do my best to get in by the finish time, even if I stretch it by 2 minutes. That's my website that was set up in response to the Badman review. When was that? Well, my job, I'm just going today to give you a very quick overview of the history of home education in England and Wales since 2009, when then Secretary of Education Ed Balls asked Graham Badman to conduct a review of home education using Kyra Ishak, an 8-year-old who'd been starved to death, as the excuse. I want to say now that over the time since then, home educators in many parts of the UK have fought off various attempts, but we haven't actually overcome them. We've just pushed them back, and we're very good at pushing back, but reflecting on Catherine's message at the end of her video just then, we really need to stand up and say enough is enough. So this is what's happened. When the Badman Review and its consequential bill fell, it wasn't because we won the argument. It was because the Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, made a bad choice, called an election and lost. Things went quiet. A few of us were saying to the home educators, get ready, it's going to come back. The first time that really came back, according to my records, was in November 2015, when Michael Wilshaw, head of Ofsted, who inspects schools here, raised concerns about illegal, unregistered schools, radicalisation, and home education. And that opened the door to a new round of media horror reports. And we've had lots of them since. The next major development really was an official report, the Wood Report, into safeguarding, and that raised concerns not from evidence, but from directors of children's services and local children's safeguarding boards in regard to illegal schools and elective home education. Followed up in December the same year with the Casey Review, which was on integration, and that also raised a number of issues in association with home education. Next move was, many of us will remember, not June 2017, when Lord Soley won a ballot, or came high enough in a ballot in the House of Lords to introduce the Home Education Duty of Local Authorities Bill, but he did, and that revitalized the endless media horror reports, totally unfounded, totally to soften up the public to accepting these things. He got his second reading in November that year, which was the first reading, really. The first one is just a procedural thing, but the first debate was in November. And by January 2018, the Minister, Lord Agnew, announced in the House of Lords that the government was going to conduct a revision of the guidance on home education. In March, there was a green paper published and looking for comments on home education. In April 2018, our Department for Education published a call for evidence and comments on revised guidance from everybody. January 2019, we've got the first mention of exclusions and off-rolling in connection with home education. I better translate off-rolling for those of you who aren't in the UK. Off-rolling is when a school here decides, a state school, a state-funded school, decides that certain pupils will lower its standing in the league tables of schools and coming up to particularly GCSE exams, our major national exam, they try and get rid of children by getting them off their registers. And it was claimed that various schools were enticing parents or bullying parents into saying they would home educate their difficult pupils. That is illegal, but all this matter of bringing it up was there to actually say we need to control home education more. And of course, the media joined in. England, well, Britain has adopted certain parts of the UN Charter on the Rights of the Child. And one of the things we've done is put in place children's commissioners. And in 2019, the Children's Commissioner for England, Anne Longfield, did a report called Skipping School, Invisible Children, and also a TV documentary with a similar title. It was a rubbish report. It was totally biased, but it is still circulating and being used as evidence that home education is not good for children. In April 2019, there was a watershed moment. The Department for Education announced another consultation, this time on children not in school, and that it planned to introduce a register of elective home educated children, whilst at the same time publishing revised HE guidance. That guidance has now been in place for 2 years, and it's causing trouble. I really don't have time to go into it today, but it looked fine at first glance, and then as you realized, and others have mentioned it this week, actually there was a major change of law. Rather than parents being assumed to be providing a suitable education for their children, unless there was evidence otherwise, the new guidance said local authorities cannot assume that children being provided with suitable education unless they have evidence to that end. A major trouble. I'll come back to that in a minute. In May 2019, another review, this time on school exclusions, including off-rolling, of course mentioned elective home education. Now, throughout those years, last 7 or 8 years, and even going back to the Badman review, there's been negative media coverage. There've been repeated questions in Parliament. Political parties, mainly the Liberal Democrats, have adopted anti-home education policies, and there's been continued negative input from organisations such as the Local Government Association, the Association of Directors of Children's Services, Ofsted, who are School Inspectorate, who I've already mentioned, and various other lobby groups have also been involved in lobbying in the media and elsewhere to give a very negative image of home education in Britain. In May 2020, there was yet another consultation regulating independent educational institutions. To me, that whilst that didn't concern home education directly, to me it seemed to be the next step in responding to the children not in school one. So what happened next? Coronavirus happened next. In March 2020, as we know, the whole world began to pandemic school at home. And what happened in England? Well, the last consultation was put on hold and it was relaunched in October, closed in November, and there has been no response to it yet. And frustrating many politicians, especially those who want to regulate home education, the children not in school consultation as also the response to it has not been published yet. And there's endless questions about when will that come. And my opinion is the last 15 months has thrown the education department into such chaos, they haven't really been able to get round to doing anything about it. However, in September last year, our Commons Education Committee, which isn't government, it is actually the supervision of government, part of Parliament. They published a call for evidence concerning home education. But while this isn't policy, it's been used as a lobbying exercise to put pressure on the department to bring forward its plans for a register of electively home educated children and to introduce formal testing of them. Slight good news, a couple of weeks ago, we had a Queen's speech for the start of a new education, a new year in Parliament, and there was nothing directly concerning home education in it. The major thing at the moment, a group of families in Portsmouth have got a really bad city council who are pushing the new guidelines to the limit, and they've just gained approval for a judicial review of the actions of that city council. And my own personal feeling is much will depend on the future, on the outcome of that case. The worst possible thing in one way, of course, is that the council wins the case. I really hope they don't. Also, not helpful would be if the council throws in the towel before it gets into court. What we'd really like to see is the case go to court and the council get a strong judgment against them, as that will shut up a lot of the other councils as well. I quickly want to cover Wales because while it's an independent, a devolved country, there's a lot of overlap and influence from one to the other. Their trouble started in 2011 with another child, Dylan Seabridge, who died, and his parents were investigated for neglect but not prosecuted. In 2012, there was a consultation on registration and monitoring of home educated children. New guidance promised in 2014. Milestone, they appointed a new children's commissioner for Wales, a woman called Sally Holland. You will see there, and I'm moving quickly, there was various steps through 2015 to bring in the new, the new guidelines. That didn't happen till 2017, but in 2016, there was a concise practice review published, child practice for Dylan Seabridge, which put a lot of blame on home education, and the Children's Commissioner used that as the basis of calls for a home education register. The new guidelines was published in January 2017 and sought to strike a balance, but the Children's Commissioner kept pushing, and in July 2019, she pushed and pushed until the government gave in and brought out a consultation on new guidance. A new organisation set up by a family in Wales at short notice called Protecting Home Education Wales in October 2019 crowdfunded an excellent legal opinion on the proposals, and that caused the Welsh Government to think seriously. However, in 2020, they went ahead with a second consultation on setting up a register to cover all children in Wales, but particularly aimed at home education children. But then again, along came coronavirus, for which I am very, very thankful. The consultation was at first extended. In June, though, the Education Minister announced that the plans for home education would not be taken forward due to the disruption caused by COVID-19 and the lack of time before last month's elections. In September last year, the Children's Commissioner for Wales announced a review of the Welsh Government's actions concerning home education, and she published that in February this year. Again, she said they're letting children down. The elections took place, as I said, and last week the new Education Minister was appointed, and I suspect she's already bending his ear saying what you're going to do about home education. That is it, folks. That's my presentation. If you want a copy of those slides, you can find them all in the Woover app section for this session. I've already uploaded them. Juliet, that was a bit longer than the deadline time, but I'm happy to take questions. I've not been looking at chat. It's up to you. You're in charge of this marathon.
Okay. Well, I just want to thank everybody that, considering how many people we had, how many presentations, you know, I'm amazed we didn't go over even more time. I think we've done really well. What I am going to do is just before, I don't want everyone to run off, but I want to end the live stream on Facebook. So please stay while I wrap up the live stream on Facebook, and thank anyone who has been watching, and please share with people who want to know about what's going on with home education around the world.